Welcome to today's deep dive, and may God bless your day and your week ahead. Today we are looking at Genesis chapter 3. And, we all know the basics of the Eden narrative, right?
Right, the Sunday school version.
Exactly. You are completely familiar with the characters, the setting, and just the general outline of humanity's very first rebellion. But today, we are deliberately skipping that superficial overview.
We really need to. There is so much more there.
There is. We are pulling insights from the really extensive scholarly footnotes of two highly regarded texts today. That would be the Holman Study Bible and the NAA Study Bible.
Both of which are just incredibly rich resources.
Yeah, they are. Because the linguistic details, the subtle psychological warfare, and, well, the profound theological implications hidden in the original Hebrew of this text, they completely redefine what is actually happening in the garden.
It totally changes the picture.
It does. We are going to unpack exactly why this ancient text remains an absolute masterclass in understanding human psychology even today, for you listening right now. So to jump right into the deep end here, let's look at the actual opening of this chapter. The transition from Genesis 2 to Genesis 3 is incredibly jarring.
It really is a massive narrative whiplash.
Yeah.
If you read the preceding chapters, you are looking at a symphony of perfect orchestrated harmony.
Yeah.
God speaks, creation happens, boundaries are established, and humanity is placed in this pristine environment with a very clear purpose. Then chapter 3 opens, and abruptly there is this serpent.
Just right there out of nowhere.
Exactly. There is no origin story given for it in the immediate text. It doesn't get a grand entrance. It is just suddenly present, completely disrupting the peace of the garden.
It almost reads like a horror movie, where the camera suddenly pans and the threat is just sitting there in the room with you.
That's a great way to put it.
But let's get into the actual identity of this threat, because picturing a literal garden variety snake slithering around an apple tree feels like a massive underreading of the text.
Oh, it is a massive underreading. When you look at the original Hebrew word used here for serpent, which is nakash, it carries a much broader and significantly more intimidating weight throughout the Old Testament.
But not just a reptile.
Not at all. According to the Holman notes, the term nakash is frequently associated with Leviathan.
Wow, the sea monster.
Right, the chaotic, terrifying sea monster of ancient Near Eastern imagery. It is also used to describe deadly, venomous serpents in the wilderness. And if you trace this specific imagery all the way to the end of the biblical narrative, all the way to the book of Revelation, this exact same entity is translated as a dragon.
A dragon. That changes the visual completely.
It does. The text is signaling a highly intelligent, intensely hostile spiritual entity. This is an active, calculating enemy of the human couple. It's not just a talking animal.
But the method of attack is what fascinates me. If you are dealing with a chaotic sea monster or a dragon, you naturally expect fire, fury, physical destruction. But the attack here is entirely psychological. It's a war of words.
And very specific words at that. This is something the NWA notes highlight beautifully. Up until this exact moment in the text, the Creator is referred to by his covenant name.
YHWH God.
Yes, YHWH God, or the Lord God. It is a highly personal, deeply relational name. But when the Nakash speaks to Eve, it deliberately drops the name YHWH.
Huh.
It just says, did God really say, using the generic term for deity, Elohim?
So it's essentially changing the perception of the relationship just by altering the vocabulary.
Precisely.
It's like, well, imagine having a warm, supportive relationship with your boss where you call them by their first name, right?
Mm.
And then someone comes along and says, did the chief executive officer formally mandate that you do this?
That is such a perfect analogy.
It instantly makes the relationship feel cold, corporate, and restrictive.
That is exactly the dynamic. By dropping the covenant name, the serpent is subtly trying to alter Eve's perception of her creator. He is attempting to take a loving father and reframe him as a distant, generic, and potentially tyrannical rulemaker.
Because it's easier to rebel against a tyrant.
Vastly easier.
Yeah.
It is much easier to justify rebelling against a cold, distant dictator than it is to betray a loving father who has provided an entire world for you to enjoy. The serpent doesn't yell, he just edits the vocabulary.
Wait, but it isn't just the serpent editing the vocabulary, is it? Eve actually changes God's words in her own response.
She does. This is a brilliant insight from the Holman Study Bible.
Because God originally told Adam, don't eat the fruit. But when Eve replies to the serpent, she says that God commanded, you must not eat it, nor shall you touch it. Where did the touch it part come from?
It came entirely from her. God never said they couldn't touch the tree. By adding that extra clause to God's command, Eve actually exaggerates the rule.
She makes it harsher.
She makes the divine boundary seem overly restrictive and completely unreasonable.
Wait, so by making the rules stricter, she actually made rebellion more likely. That seems somewhat counterintuitive. Usually we think stricter rules keep people safer.
You would think so. But psychologically, when we add our own rigid human traditions to divine instructions, we often make those instructions look oppressive. Think about how human institutions often operate today.
Oh, we love making extra rules.
Exactly. We build these massive extra fences around a simple rule. Then, when the fence feels too tight, it breeds resentment. Once a boundary feels unreasonable to you, crossing it starts to feel justified. Eve's addition of "nor shall you touch it" reveals that the serpent's psychological framing is already working.
She is beginning to view God as a micromanager.
Yes, which sets up the core temptation perfectly. The serpent promises them that if they eat the fruit, their eyes will be opened and they will be like God.
And here we hit the profound tragic irony of the entire event, which the NWA notes point out so clearly.
It is heartbreaking irony.
Just a few paragraphs earlier in Genesis 1, the text explicitly states that humans were already made in the image of God. They already reflected his nature.
They already possessed a delegated divine authority to rule over creation.
Exactly. They were tricked into rebelling against their creator in order to steal a status they essentially already possessed.
They already had the keys to the kingdom.
Right.
In their attempt to elevate themselves to divine status, they actually degraded themselves. They surrendered their God-given authority over the animals to one of the very creatures they were supposed to be stewarding.
That is just devastating, but it brings up a huge question. If Eve is having this intense, philosophically devastating conversation with this entity, where is Adam during all of this? The popular imagery, like in paintings and movies, always places him off somewhere else.
Trimming a hedge somewhere.
Yeah, maybe tending to another part of Eden, leaving Eve to fend for herself.
That popular imagery is entirely incorrect. The NAA notes stress this point heavily. The text explicitly states that Adam was right there. It literally says he was with her.
So he wasn't absent?
He wasn't absent. He wasn't distracted on the other side of the garden. He was standing right there listening to this entire exchange.
Wow.
This means Adam wasn't deceived in the same subtle psychological way Eve was. His action was one of conscious, deliberate, passive complicity. As the designated guardian of the garden who received the original instruction directly from God, he stood by silently, allowed the deception to unfold, and then willingly participated.
He completely abdicated his responsibility. And the fallout is instantaneous. The serpent promised them enlightenment and divine power, but the reality is a crushing wave of vulnerability.
The Holman notes point out they gain a profound sense of inadequacy, fear, and shame.
Their immediate instinct is to stitch fig leaves together to hide their bodies.
The fig leaves represent the very first human attempt at a cover-up. It is inadequate human effort trying to mask deep, internal shame.
Which sets the stage for one of the most poignant moments in the whole narrative.
It really does. God comes walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and he calls out to them with a question. Where are you? Now, an omnipresent, omniscient creator isn't lacking geographic coordinates.
Right. He doesn't need a GPS.
He knows exactly where they are hiding behind the foliage.
So it's not a search party. It's a father asking a question he already knows the answer to, giving his kids a chance to come clean.
Exactly. It is a probing relational question. The Holman sources explain that it is an invitation to grace. He is giving them the opportunity to step out of the shadows, take responsibility for their actions, and confess.
But they absolutely refuse the invitation. Instead, we get the invention of the blame game.
The oldest game in the book.
It is. I remember when I was a kid, I accidentally knocked over an expensive lamb in the living room while roughhousing. When my mom walked in and asked what happened, I didn't hesitate for a second. I pointed right at the family dog and said, "He bumped the table." I knew it was a lie, but the instinct for self-preservation completely overrode my integrity. Adam does the exact same thing, but on a cosmic scale. When God confronts him, Adam says, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit."
The audacity of that statement is staggering when you really think about it.
He throws his wife under the bus.
He does, but he also subtly indicts God in the process. He implies, if you hadn't given me this woman, this wouldn't have happened.
Oh, wow. He blames the creator.
And then God turns to Eve, and she immediately deflects as well. She says, "The serpent deceived me. The buck has passed from Adam to God to Eve to the creature. No one owns their failure.
Because of that unrepentant deflection, the narrative moves into the judgments. But right in the middle of these dark pronouncements, there is a fascinating shift when God addresses the serpent in Genesis 3:15.
Yes.
He says there will be hostility between the serpent's offspring and the woman's offspring. He says, he will strike your head and you will strike his heel.
Both the Holman and NAA sources refer to this specific verse as the proto-evangelium.
Which translates to what exactly?
It translates to the first gospel, or the first prediction of the gospel message. The imagery used here is of a colossal cosmic struggle. The serpent will strike the heel of the woman's offspring. Now, a heel strike from a venomous snake is incredibly painful.
Very painful.
It causes immense suffering, but it is ultimately a survivable wound. Christian theology sees this as a profound foreshadowing of the crucifixion. It represents a horrific, agonizing wounding, but not a permanent defeat.
Because the second half of the verse flips the dynamic entirely.
Right. The woman's offspring will strike or crush the serpent's head. A crushed head is a fatal, permanent, final defeat.
So right at the epicenter of humanity's greatest failure, before they are even exiled from the garden, God is already planting a promise.
He is. He is promising a champion who will endure a brutal strike, but will ultimately win the war against evil.
That is an incredible detail to find hidden right in the middle of the curses. But we do need to address the consequences that fall on the man and the woman, because they set the stage for all of human history. The judgment on the woman involves pain in childbirth, but God also says your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you.
This is a highly misunderstood verse.
It is, because in modern conversation, desire usually sounds romantic or affectionate. But looking at the linguistic analysis of the original text from the NAA notes, that is not what is happening here at all.
Not at all. The Hebrew word translated as desire here is teshuka. To accurately understand its meaning, you only have to look one chapter forward to Genesis 4, where the exact same word is used.
Oh, with Cain and Abel.
Yes. God tells Cain that sin is crouching at his door. And its teshuka, its desire, is for him, but he must rule over it. In that context, the word clearly denotes a desire to master, to dominate, to consume.
So this verse in Genesis 3 isn't about romantic longing. It is predicting a fierce power struggle.
Precisely. It indicates that a primary consequence of the fall is a deep relational fracture. It shatters the original design of an equal but distinct partnership.
What theologians call a complementarian relationship.
Yes. That harmony is turned into a constant battle for dominance. The warning is that human relationships will now be characterized by power struggles, inequality, and an endless push and pull for control.
So the historical battle of the sexes, all the subjugation and conflict we see throughout human history.
It is presented here not as God's intended design, but as the tragic, broken result of this original rebellion.
That makes so much sense. Now, while Eve's consequence fractures human relationships, what happens to Adam's relationship with the earth itself? Because before the fall, work was described as a joyful blessing. He was placed in the garden to tend it. It was a collaborative partnership with creation.
That partnership is severed. God tells Adam that the ground itself is now cursed. The Hebrew word is arar. The work transforms into toil. It becomes a grueling battle against sweat, thorns, and thistles. The abundant, joyful provision of the garden is replaced by an agonizing struggle to merely survive.
It is the ancient origin of burnout. I mean, you think about modern hustle culture, right? The endless grind, the feeling of emails and responsibilities piling up like thistles in a field.
That's a very real way to experience it today.
You work yourself to the bone, you achieve a brief moment of success, and then the weeds just grow back the next day. It is an exhausting cycle that ultimately culminates in the most grim reality of the judgment mortality. For dust you are, and to dust you will return.
The introduction of death. The very earth from which Adam was formed and the earth he is now forced to fight against for his daily survival will eventually reclaim him. It is a heavy, devastating consequence.
So they are cursed, their relationships are fractured into power struggles, their daily work is going to be exhausting toil, and they are eventually going to die. I have to ask, is there any silver lining here at all before the chapter closes?
There actually is. There is a profound moment of hidden mercy right before the chapter ends. Remember those flimsy, pathetic fig leaves they stitched together to cover their shame?
The cover-up?
Right. God doesn't let them walk out into the harsh reality of the cursed world wearing crumbling leaves. The Holman notes highlight that God made them garments of skin to clothe them.
But wait, to get garments of skin, an animal had to die.
Exactly. This represents the very first death in God's creation, and it was instituted by God himself to properly cover the shame and exposure of humanity.
That's incredibly powerful.
It is an act of deep divine grace, but it is a costly grace. It establishes a fundamental biblical principle. Human sin and shame require a covering, and that covering requires a sacrifice.
So this points forward.
It points forward to the entire sacrificial system of the Old Testament. And ultimately, it foreshadows the necessity of a substitutionary sacrifice, which Christian theology identifies as Christ, to properly and permanently cover human brokenness.
That reframes the entire ending. Even in their darkest moment, they are literally wrapped in evidence of God's provision. But we still have to grapple with the final tragic scene, the expulsion. Adam and Eve are driven out of the Garden of Eden. On the surface, being kicked out of paradise feels like the ultimate final punishment.
It feels like punishment, yes, but if you look closely at the text, and this is something the NAA notes bring out wonderfully, the expulsion is actually an act of severe divine protection.
Protection? How so?
God explicitly states that he must banish them so that they do not reach out, take from the tree of life, eat and live forever.
Wait, why would living forever be a bad thing? I thought that was the goal.
Normally, yes. But because of their new condition, if humans were to eat from the tree of life in their fallen, corrupted, and shame-filled state, they would be trapped.
Oh, I see.
They would immortalize their sin, their relational fracture, and their physical toil. They would be locked in an eternal condition of suffering with zero hope of redemption. By removing them from the garden and cutting off access to the tree of life, God is preventing immortal brokenness.
It is essentially a quarantine. You isolate the infected individuals so the disease doesn't become a permanent, eternal state.
Exactly. He is subjecting them to mortality, yes.
Yeah.
But mortality is the very thing that allows for the possibility of a future resurrection and complete restoration.
That completely flips the script on the exile.
It does. And to ensure this quarantine, the text notes that God places cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life.
That imagery of the cherubim is so striking.
And it echoes throughout the rest of the biblical narrative. Cherubim are consistently associated with guarding the holy presence of God. You see their images woven into the thick curtain of the tabernacle, and they position right on top of the Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
They serve as a constant reminder that sinful, broken humanity cannot simply stroll back into the direct, unveiled presence of a holy God on their own terms. The way back to life is guarded. It requires a mediator.
Wow. We have covered incredible ground today, from the ancient mythological weight of the serpent, to the linguistic manipulation of God's name, to the devastating origins of our power struggles and our burnout. But bringing all of this back to the surface, it really makes you wonder about the shared human condition today.
It certainly does.
Because you listening right now, we are still stitching together our own fig leaves, aren't we?
Right.
Whether it is meticulously curating a polished social media presence to hide our insecurities, or deflecting blame onto our coworkers, our upbringing, or our spouses the moment we are confronted with our own failures. The patterns established in this ancient text are the exact same patterns we default to in our daily lives.
The impulse to hide from authority, the instinct to pass the buck, the desire to elevate ourselves and be the unquestionable rulers of our own tiny kingdoms, it is all perfectly mirrored in Genesis 3.
It really is. And that leaves us with a final provocative thought to carry with you this week. We've seen that our deepest, oldest human instinct when we fail is to hide in the bushes, to run away, and to cover ourselves up in shame. But the God revealed in this text didn't wait for humanity to fix themselves. He actively walked into the dark, shadowed garden, calling out, "Where are you?"
A beautiful picture of grace.
Yes, not to strike them down, but to find them, to engage with them, and ultimately to clothe them in a costly sacrifice. So the question is, if our oldest instinct is to hide, how does viewing God as one who actively seeks us out in our darkest moments of failure change the way you handle your own guilt today? Do you stay hiding in the foliage, or do you step out into the light? Think about that. Thank you so much for joining us for this journey. May God bless all listeners.